David Beckham had hardly had a chance to hang up his boots and wave a tearful goodbye to football in Paris in 2013 before the rumour mills had already begun swinging into action over on the other side of the pond with regards to a potential David Beckham FC. Of course, whilst Becks was hanging up his boots, he wasn't really waving goodbye to football. You can never really bid farewell to a sport that has made you one of the most recognisable people on the planet, and nor did Beckham have any intentions of quietly sailing off into the sun. A sensational footballer with a particular prowess for long-range passes, crosses into the box and set pieces, Beckham's talent should never be overlooked. And yet, the London-born, adopted Mancunian was a brand as much as he was a footballer throughout the majority of his playing days. Indeed, many felt Beckham's move to Los Angeles, which came shortly after his 32nd birthday, was a move motivated by brand Beckham above all else, as the Real Madrid man still had plenty to offer European football, a fact that was exhibited in his 2 loan moves to AC Milan and repeated selection for England. 7 years on from Beckham's retirement, his business portfolio has only grown, and his most ambitious and demanding project has come in Miami, Florida. Since Team Beckham took to the field for the first time in an MLS encounter in March 2020, a number of you have asked me to take a look at the story of Major League Soccer's 25th franchise. So that's exactly what I'm going to do, in the theme of a series of questions. The first question one may ask is, why would Beckham want to own an MLS franchise in the first place? He has plenty of money, why bother with the hassle, you might wonder. Well, everyone has to find a way in which to pass the time, and Beckham obviously still has a passion for football, which rather answers that artificial point, but more pertinently, one may ask why pick an MLS team rather than a team in England, Spain, or any of Europe's more esteemed football leagues. Of course, Beckham does own a team in England to a certain extent, having acquired a 10% stake in Salford City from Peter Lim back in January 2019. To give him equal ownership with the likes of Gary Neville and Ryan Giggs, making the most famed members of Manchester United's class of '92 the team's majority shareholders. However, I think it's pretty clear that Beckham has invested far more of his time and resources into his franchise in Miami than he has in his belated minority shareholding in Salford City. So the point still stands, why the MLS? You may or may not recall that when David Beckham joined LA Galaxy in 2007, his contract wasn't like everyone else's. It was so different to everyone else's, in fact, that it forced the MLS to completely restructure its previously very strict wage structure that had been put in place to prevent financial recklessness. The US has a history of soccer teams and leagues going bust, and in 2007 when Becks arrived, teams had salary caps of $2.1 million for their entire playing squads. When David Beckham joined LA Galaxy from Real Madrid, he signed a 5-year contract worth a minimum of $6.5 million a year, more than 3 times every other MLS team's overall salary cap. His lucrative contract was sanctioned by the creation of a new rule in the MLS, named the Designated Player Rule, although commonly nicknamed the Beckham Rule, which allowed each MLS team to have 3 designated players, which would operate outside of the club's regular wage structure, with $400,000 of each designated player's salary being covered by the league, and the rest having to be paid by the club's owner. Remarkably, 13 years on, during a period in which the money in football has exploded here in Europe, no current MLS player earns more than Beckham did during his 5 years in Los Angeles. Even among future designated players, or DPs though, Beckham's contract was unusual. Among its many favourable clauses designed to tempt the global superstar to join the MLS was one particularly unique clause which stipulated that Beckham would be able to purchase his very own MLS franchise in the future for a fixed price of $25 million, with the only exception that the franchise couldn't be in the city of New York, who were already set to have their second franchise in the form of New York City FC, joining the New York Red Bulls. The fixed $25 million fee was one the MLS considered to be fairly large at the time. When Toronto FC bought into the league in 2007, they only paid $10 million for the privilege, so the fee seemed somewhat inflation-proof. However, Beckham was playing the long game, and 13 years on, his foresight has proved to be masterful. In 2015, New York City FC paid $100 million to join the MLS. FC Cincinnati, Nashville and Austin, new franchises in 2019, 2020 and 2021 respectively, each paid $150 million. 2023's new franchise, St. Louis and Sacramento, will pay $200 million, and the most expensive franchise of all is 2021 arrival Charlotte, who will pay an enormous $325 million, a figure that some sources claim will become the minimum fee for any future franchises from here on in. That means Charlotte will pay a remarkable 13 times as much as Inter Miami to join Major League Soccer just 12 months on from the arrival of Beckham's franchise, or 1,300% more if you prefer percentages, and the fees other franchises are paying to buy into the league should give some indication of why Beckham wasn't willing to pass up the opportunity to create a franchise at such a cut price. According to Forbes in 2019, Atlanta United are the most valuable MLS franchise, valued at $500 million, whilst Colorado Rapids are the least valuable, valued at $190 million. Whilst MLS takeovers are infrequent, it would follow that even if Beckham and those around him made a real dog's dinner of managing Inter Miami, and for our US viewers, that just means to make a mess of things, they would still likely see at least an 800% return on their investment by just selling the club. That's the type of investment few would overlook, and certainly brand Beckham never would. Hopefully that makes it pretty clear why Becks would pick the MLS over a team in any other part of the world, but why Miami? Good question. Thanks, Alfie. Well, aside from the fact that Miami has a very hospitable climate for a jet-setting multimillionaire retired footballer, there are also some rather more business-orientated reasons. As soon as Beckham retired, speculation began as to where he would look to take his franchise. The state of Florida was immediately touted among the most likely locations, with the South of America generally thought to be underrepresented in the MLS, and with the third most populous state in the United States not having a single team at that time. Orlando City joined the MLS in 2015, but their proposals had been cast in some doubt back in 2013. Miami Fusion and the Tampa Bay Rowdies were Florida's most recent MLS representatives, both having lost their MLS status with the restructuring of the league in 2001, with neither side having been considered to be financially viable. What's more, Miami has a huge Latino community, traditionally America's most soccer-supporting demographic. Inter Miami's name, Club Internacional de Football Miami in full, pays homage to the city's Latino and Spanish-speaking communities, which are believed to account for 70% of Miami's population. Ultimately then, Miami was seen as a gap in the market in America's third largest state, with a large soccer-hungry population, and equally importantly, a mayor who was keen to bring Major League Soccer to his or her city in the form of Carlos Jimenez. Interestingly, Beckham's former agent and business partner Simon Fuller, who was the creator of the likes of Pop Idol and American Idol, was said to have been a keen advocate of Miami as the site for Beckham's franchise. Fuller had a long-standing relationship with the Beckhams, both a personal and business one, ever since managing Victoria Beckham's pop group the Spice Girls, and he owned a 33% stake of all of brand Beckham's business interests, including Inter Miami, up until 2019. The Beckhams bought Fuller out of his stake in their business affairs last year for $50 million, which seems remarkably cheap to me, given their value, but perhaps he felt obligated to accept that price given all that the Beckhams have done for him, which is a lesson he could maybe teach Barcelona in relation to Lionel Messi. As such, despite reportedly having been a big pro-Miami voice, Fuller no longer has any ownership of Inter Miami, which is owned by the Beckhams, the Sprint CEO Marcelo Claure, Jorge and Jose Mas of Florida-based construction giant Maztec, and SoftBank CEO Masayoshi Son, the latter of whom is Japan's second richest man with a net worth in excess of $30 billion. So now we know why Becks picked the MLS over other leagues and why he opted for Miami ahead of any other city. But I guess at this point, we'd best come to the nitty-gritty and look at how it actually came about. Beckham's interest in Miami, which was first reported when he retired in May 2013, was all but confirmed in December 2013 when Miami-Dade County Commissioners voted to allow Beckham and Simon Fuller to negotiate with Mayor Jimenez regarding the building of a soccer-specific stadium in downtown Miami. That is almost 7 years ago now, yet Inter Miami only joined the MLS in 2020. So what took so long? By February 2014, the MLS had already announced that Beckham had exercised his option to buy his own franchise and that the franchise would be based in Miami. In the 6 years plus since, 6 new franchises have joined the MLS, meanwhile progress in Miami often appeared laborious and problematic. The issues for Miami Beckham United, which was the original name of the team's holding group, since changed to Miami Freedom Park LLC, was securing a location, plans, and the construction of a stadium in downtown Miami. In March 2014, Beckham announced that the group planned to build a stadium at the Port of Miami, but opposition from local businesses led to those proposals being scrapped and replaced with fresh plans for a stadium in Miami's Museum Park. But those plans were also rejected by the city of Miami. This led the MLS Commissioner Don Garber to issue a public statement declaring that official expansion status wouldn't be granted to Beckham and Miami until proposals for a stadium in downtown Miami had been approved by the city and signed off for planning, throwing the whole Miami project into some doubt. There have been more stadium proposals and sites suggested for a new ground in Miami than any mere mortal could count, at least using their hands, ranging from a ground in Little Havana to the suggestion of a joint 65,000-seater arena to be shared with local University American football team Miami Hurricanes, all of which were rejected for one reason or another. The current plans are for a stadium close to Miami International Airport, around 10 miles from downtown Miami. The proposed stadium, which would have 25,000 seats, would be located on a 131-acre site, featuring over 1 million square feet of office, retail and commercial space, and potentially as many as 750 hotel rooms. Beckham received approval for construction of the ground in November 2018, with a scheduled completion date in the year 2022. But that seems extremely ambitious, given that an exact site hasn't even been identified yet, and obviously no ground has broken. Inter Miami have released lots of impressive CGI images of the new stadium, but for now, it remains little more than a lofty plan, and Inter Miami still don't have a stadium they can truly call home. So how have they been granted an MLS expansion franchise at all, you might ask? Well, Major League Soccer sort of conceded some ground on that one, if you'll pardon the pun, in the hope that Miami Freedom Park would one day be completed. Until then, Inter Miami will play their home games at the Inter Miami CF Stadium, which is located in Fort Lauderdale, around 30 miles north of downtown Miami. And yes, David Beckham does appear to have the longest arm on earth in that picture. Built in the space of just 14 months at a cost of only $60 million, and I use the word only in the context of building stadiums, the Inter Miami CF Stadium can accommodate 18,000 fans, and was built on the site of the old Lockhart Stadium, which was home to the Fort Lauderdale Strikers. The Fort Lauderdale Strikers no longer exist, replaced by Fort Lauderdale CF, who are owned by Beckham & Co. and will serve as a feeder club to Inter Miami, competing in the USL. Fort Lauderdale CF will continue to play their home games at the Inter Miami CF Stadium, although presumably its name will change once Inter Miami move into Miami Freedom Park. Inter Miami were due to play their first game at the temporary Inter Miami CF Stadium in March 2020 against Beckham's former club LA Galaxy, but that game was cancelled due to COVID-19, as were all of Inter Miami's early home fixtures, with the club playing their first game there in August behind closed doors, which just so happened to be their first ever MLS win, as they defeated cross-state rivals Orlando City 3-2. So now we know why Becks picked the MLS, why he picked Miami, and why the whole thing took so long to actually come about. But I guess the biggest question of all is, will it be a success? Well, on that front, I suppose there are two different ways in which you can frame success. Results-based success on the pitch and financial success in terms of strengthening brand Beckham's already very lucrative company coffers. On the second point, whilst I have seen numerous news stories suggesting otherwise, I find it very difficult to envisage David Beckham losing money through the creation of Inter Miami. As I said, the franchise cost him $25 million. One suspects he has recouped far more than that from his new very wealthy Miami Freedom Park LLC business partners, and if he were to exit the club even at this early stage, he could do so whilst making a very healthy profit during a far from healthy economic climate. The only way in which the project could turn sour for Becks if he were to invest huge amounts of his own money in the infrastructure around Inter Miami's new stadium, and if those projects were unsuccessful. But ultimately, that would be separate from his actual investment in a football club, so I don't want to get too bogged down in that. One thing that's worth bearing in mind, particularly for non-US viewers, is that owning an MLS franchise is nothing like owning a Premier League, Championship, or La Liga club. It's called single entity, and it means that when you buy into a franchise in the MLS, you are essentially buying shares in the league as one sole entity, rather than an individual club. Whilst in Europe, and indeed most of the world, when you buy a football club, you own that football club and live and die by the financial success of the club, in the MLS, that is not the case. Ultimately, your investment depends upon the success and failure of the entire league, unless you sell your franchise. And whilst your team may play a part in the success or failure of the league, it is unlikely to be the defining factor. To put things in a business context, in case that all seems a bit confusing, MLS franchises or teams are like different departments within a single company. So the success or failure of one department is just one small part of the overall story. An owner's investments will often be defined by the success of the company as a whole. If you really wanted to labour the metaphor, it is as though Beckham is one of 26 company directors who are paid solely in dividends dependent upon the entire company's success, and he is just heading up one department. With that in mind, you might ask whether buying into the MLS is a good business idea, and many would tell you that it isn't. Major League Soccer teams are not particularly profitable. In fact, many aren't profitable at all. MLS revenues range from $78 million at the highest to just $18 million at the lowest, with an average of around $34 million. Compare that to a European super club like Manchester United, who turn over more than $750 million, or even a relegation-threatened Premier League team like West Ham, who have a turnover in excess of $230 million, and you can start to see why, at first glance, some economists can't quite wrap their heads around why so many billionaires are willing to fork out huge sums to own their own MLS franchise. What's more, since you are buying into the league, who technically own all of the clubs, all profits belong to the league, and are then redistributed as the league sees fit between all MLS teams. You may wonder then how on earth any MLS owner makes money. Well, it's worth noting that the redistribution process is one of the reasons why teams often report small or non-existent profits, since they would rather reinvest their income themselves than hand it over to the league. There's also the factor of stadiums and developments, often funded partly through public funds, which are actually owned by the club's owners, who can profit through any income outside of merchandising and gate receipts, all whilst owning a significant and often appreciating asset, which typically comes to define the value of each MLS club. Most significantly though, when you buy into the MLS, you don't just get yourselves a slice of America's premier soccer competition, you also get a portion of Soccer United marketing, better known as SUM. Without getting too deep into the weeds, SUM is the most lucrative soccer-related body in the United States, receiving revenue via the MLS, broadcasting rights, and just about any soccer-related activity shy of an under-9s game that takes place in the United States. Valued at close to $500 million in 2011, SUM is now thought to be worth around $2.5 billion, a 5x multiple in less than a decade. Soccer United marketing's rapid growth is a result of the growth of association football, or soccer, in the United States as a whole, a trend which many feel could continue long term. So when you buy an MLS franchise, you are in essence taking a bullish position on the future of soccer in the United States of America. If you think soccer will flourish in the USA, purchasing an MLS franchise is likely to be a shrewd investment. If you expect the sport to shrink or stagnate in popularity in the coming years, then Becks would have been better off buying Hull City, ridding us of the toxic alams, and leading us on a glorious return to the Premier League and European football. As much as I wish he had, I tend to think soccer in the United States still has plenty of room to grow. Whether Inter Miami will succeed on the pitch, and without wanting to seem as though I'm dodging the question, whilst also being acutely aware that this video is becoming dangerously long, that is just about anyone's guess. Thus far, they have had a pretty miserable time of things, winning just 2 of their opening 11 games, leaving them bottom of the Eastern Conference. But clearly, it is extremely early doors, and they have entered the MLS during unprecedented times, playing very few home games, and even those that they have played at home have been without any fans. The system of youth development Beckham looks to be pursuing through Fort Lauderdale CF would seem to be a wise one and long-term one, and one major advantage for Inter Miami is that they have a club president who actually knows something and has vast experience within football, something that frighteningly few presidents actually possess. Becks will also have one of the most comprehensive contact books in world football, which has already been reflected in Inter Miami's recruitment of Blaise Matuidi, who actually scored in Beckham's last ever game for PSG against Brest. The presence of Beckham alone will always prompt interest in Inter Miami, which is evidenced by the number of requests that I got to make this video. But ultimately, they will have to get their recruitment and youth development right over the next couple of years if they are to make a fist of things in a league which, while still in its developmental stage, is always improving. So that's just about all from me. I really hope you enjoyed this video, which took me a little while to make and is, I suspect, longer than a lot of my other videos. I apologise for that if you're someone who prefers shorter videos, but there was a lot to pack in and plenty I had to leave out. Thank you all as ever for watching. I would greatly appreciate you hitting the like button if you enjoyed the video, since I'm told that it helps with the YouTube algorithms. Feel free to drop a comment down below, and even more importantly, please do subscribe and turn on notifications for HITC Sevens. And you can also follow me on Twitter or Instagram via the username @HITC Sevens to get the latest updates on the channel and all of my random musings surrounding the beautiful game.